Well, today the Department of Justice released 3 million documents in the latest Epstein drop, and some of the information in this drop was pretty darn damning against the president. These just don't sound made up. They just don't really sound made up. Very, very disturbing files. They were so damning that the DOJ actually removed the pages after the fact. But we have them. This is what we saw later on. Was this page not found when trying to access the documents? Previously, the documents were there. They're claiming, though, the DOJ is saying, no, we've released everything. We're done. What will be done about this? Probably nothing. In fact, this is what Todd Blanche with the Department of Justice, this is what he had to say.
I don't think that the public or you all are going to uncover men within the Epstein files that abuse women.
Yeah, because we redacted it all, right? Because these women apparently abused themselves. Ro Khanna has this to say. He says, no, all the files are not released, and you do have the names of the men. You're just not releasing them.
If Blanche believes that there is no cover-up, then he should release the 302 files. The 302 files are where the survivors name who these rich and powerful men are. But if Blanche continues to not release the 302 statements, to not release the prosecution memos, then it's a cover-up.
That's it. Just release the files. But instead, they're playing games with us and covering things up and then deleting things and then saying, we gave you everything and there's nothing else to see here. They just think we're so unbelievably stupid. It's all just very bizarre. And this is one of the biggest scandals with all these powerful people doing these very awful things that were clearly being done as a mode for blackmail so that everything in this country's foreign policy, all of our tax dollars, all of that being done because these sickos couldn't contain themselves. It's not just about the abuse of the girls, it's the abuse of a country.
Say there's a reporter named Wolf, and Epstein conspired. This just came out yesterday in the millions of pages of documents, how crazy this is, conspired against me in order to fight like hell to make sure I lose the election. That's the only thing that was mentioned about me. Now, about Democrats, some really bad stuff, but about me, that Wolf, whoever Wolf is, he wrote a book, a couple of books, and Epstein conspired against me. So that takes care of Epstein as far as Trump is concerned, but you got a lot of Democrats out there that are very much involved with Epstein. But I'll be honest with you, you got to get back to running the country, too.
On the Epstein files, you talked about Democrats who were in there. Elon Musk was also in there, and so was your Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and correspondence that he had with him. Did you read those new files that were published to the Department of Justice?
I have a lot of things I'm doing, a lot of things I'm doing. I don't know. You mentioned 2 names. I'm sure they're fine. I'm sure they're fine. Otherwise, it would have been major headlines. Oh. I think it's really time for the country to get onto something else. Now that nothing came out about me, other than it was a conspiracy against me, literally, by Epstein and other people. But I think it's time now for the country to maybe get onto something else.
What would you say to the survivors who built David
You are the worst reporter. No wonder CNN has no ratings because of people like you. You know, she's a young woman. I don't think I've ever seen you smile. I've known you for 10 years. I don't think I've ever seen a smile on your face.
I'm asking you about survivors.
You know why you're not smiling? Because you know you're not telling the truth. And you're a very dishonest organization, and they should be ashamed of you.
That is our president, Donald John Trump, the 34-time felon. I'm only belling with the 34-time felons, talking about what else but his place in the Epstein files. I think it's pretty obvious from his response and the response of MAGA world that Trump is running scared. That, like, at this point, Trump is really, really personally wounded by this. But let's just get to the brass tacks, folks. The U.S. Department of Justice released over 3 million pages of documents, including emails, photos, videos, and other material from federal investigations into Jeffrey Epstein on January the 30th. That was last Friday. This release was done under the Epstein Files Transparency Act. As you guys know, Donald Trump fought that every step of the way. Now he comes out and says, "Oh, well, you know, I told them to release these files because they exonerate me." I mean, let me just tell you, folks, they do not. Okay, they seriously do not. The stuff that's in these files is absolutely vile and repugnant. Now, all of it may not be true because some of these things come from tip lines But even if a tenth of it is true, it validates the most outlandish, insane conspiracy theories that we, as the public, have been told were beyond the pale for the rich elites in our society. Now, if you remember, Vladimir Putin said many years ago, he said the West is run by satanic pedophiles. That's what he said. You can go look it up. Okay? And we all know that the West hates Vladimir Putin, hates everything, hates his guts, and tries to blame him for everything, including this. And we'll get to that later on. But so much of this is stuff that has been germinating and circulating for so long. It's easy to understand why he came to that conclusion. It really is. There's stuff about murders in the Epstein Files. A lot of it has been censored. They said that they had to remove files that featured child sex abuse or murder or violence. And so they ended up removing a lot of it, which shows you that there's a lot of stuff in these files that was graphic content, including maybe deaths. There's also talk about cannibalism, black magic rituals, experiments on human beings. We're going to get into that later on in the show. Violent drug addiction. The archive of Epstein contains enough material to finish off a lot of the elites in the Western world, not just the United States, but also in the UK and France and other places like that. I know what most people want to know is what's in the files. So I did my job, folks. I know you depend on me to do the research. I did a lot of research on this over the last week since they released the files. I've stayed up a few nights, overnight, looking through as much of the material as I could. Obviously, most people would want to know where Donald Trump is featured in the files. He's featured more than 3,000 times. Well, he was when they first released the files. Show you that they were scrubbing it. When I went back to the DOJ website, they said he is only featured in 1,200 times. So how do you go from being mentioned 3,000 times to 1,200 times? Unless there was a certain amount of scrubbing that took place. But thank God, I from the time they released it, I was like, okay, no, we gotta. I had a feeling that they would try to erase as much of the stuff that included people like Donald Trump as possible. But when the files were released, when they were first released, he was mentioned 3,000 times, over 3,000 times. The release included a spreadsheet of allegations against Donald Trump. To me, the most important one, as it relates to us as a society and as a world, is that the FBI report cited a human source close to released in the final batch of these files that claim that Donald Trump has been compromised by the state of Israel. Now, if you listen to this show, and I know you do, if you listen closely to this show on a regular basis, I talk about Israel and how it has such the Zionist lobby has such a hold over all of our politicians, Democrats, Republicans. It really doesn't matter. It's just like Marjorie Taylor Greene said in the intro, that it really doesn't matter. The Democrats and Republicans, whether it's AOC, whether it's Donald Trump, whether it's Barack Obama, whether it's George W., it really doesn't matter. They're all beholden to the same corporate interests. And a lot of those interests are Zionist or Zionist-aligned interests. People like Larry Ellison, the second richest man in the world, who owns CBS and is currently, destroying CBS's News's prestigious name that they spent decades building up by just becoming a straight-up Zionist propaganda channel on the level of Fox News or MSNBC at this point. But yeah, the FBI actually has a report citing a confidential source saying that Trump has been compromised by Israel, which makes a ton of sense. A ton of sense. I've been saying as much for many years now that Donald Trump, the corporate media which is controlled by the Zionists, much of it, and the elites in our society, controlled by the Zionists, much of them have tried their best to try to deflect any criticism of our politicians being controlled and owned by Israel to Russia. Donald Trump is owned by Russia. Yeah, it's Russia. Yeah, it's Russia. Yeah, Russia. Dude, no president in Donald Trump's first term, no president had done more against Russia than 30 years since Ronald Reagan was president. Even Fareed Zakaria from CNN had to admit that eventually, but it was after Donald Trump was out of the White House that he admitted that. So the whole point was to try to pit Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin against each other, hoping that they would get into a huge squabble. Again, that is Zionist, right-wing Zionist as well, propaganda to try to force, again, a sort of war of the worlds, the East versus the West. This is what they want, because then nobody is focusing on Israel and the Zionist control over all of our world banking system and many of the most important countries and individuals in the world. So that, I thought that was very much an important part of the files. There were documents in the Epstein files that were public and then deleted by the Department of Justice. Some of the stuff, there's sworn testimony from someone who said that Donald Trump threatened to kill her if she exposed Jeffrey Epstein's sexual abuse. Another complainant accuses Donald Trump in being involved in sex trafficking, literal sex trafficking, with chilling details suggesting that Trump was allegedly present during the murder of a newborn child. Now that's relevant to us here in Northwest Indiana, because allegedly it was on Lake Michigan that this child was murdered and thrown into our lake off of our coast. Now, I could not find exactly the timeline of this, but it would make sense if this happened when Donald Trump was here in Gary, in Northwest Indiana, with his pageant. Remember, and the casino, Trump Casino. I don't know if I've told the story here, but I actually performed at the Miss USA, at Donald Trump's Miss USA pageant when I was a much younger man. Okay. And so I was there at the pageant with Donald Trump. I didn't get to meet him though. I saw him from afar, but I didn't get to actually talk to Donald Trump or actually take any pictures or anything like that. But he was here. I remember it. Miss USA was here. The casino boats were here. And this complainant says that her child was murdered by Donald Trump and her uncle, and they threw the corpse of the body off in Lake Michigan. Again, you know, we're not that far from Lake Michigan here. There were other claims that calendar girl parties were held at Mar-a-Lago, with allegations that Epstein would bring young girls to these events, that Trump was involved in auctioning them off. Like literally they'd auction these young women off. High-profile individuals, including Elon Musk and Trump's own family, were allegedly in attendance at these parties. In addition, another complaint details witnessing a sex trafficking ring at a Trump golf course in California during the mid-90s, claiming to have seen Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's accomplice and former girlfriend, involved in the entire operation. Now, again, these are not new allegations. These are things that have been around for years. So it's not like some of these things are just political hits. A lot of these did not come to light. A lot of these things came to light before Donald Trump's political career was ever even a thing. Who else appears in the Epstein files? Probably other than Donald Trump, the biggest star would be Bill Clinton. We all know that Bill Clinton and Donald Trump were great friends for years. Donald Trump was the guest at the Clinton White House over 30 times during the 90s. We have countless pictures of them together at golf tournaments with Playboy bunnies and all kinds of young women with their wives. Obviously, you know, there's the famous picture of Bill and Hillary at Melania and Donald's wedding. So these people were great friends. Ivanka Trump, which is Donald Trump's daughter, and Chelsea Clinton, which is Bill and Hillary's daughter, were best friends growing up. Best friends. So again, this is an incestuous world that these people live in. So Donald Trump, he appears in a lot of the images from the Epstein Files, including in like hot tubs and saunas. There was famously the picture of Bill Clinton being massaged that leaked at some point right before the 2020 Democratic National Convention. He ended up speaking at that convention anyway, in spite of the fact that one of Epstein's victims was pictured massaging him in an airport. You see flight logs. He appears all over the flight logs and photos with Epstein and associates. The private jet logs show that Bill Clinton took 4 international flights in 2002 and 2003 on Epstein's Lolita Express. That was the name of his plane, the Lolita Express. He also appears in photos taken at Jeffrey Epstein's estate. So he was flying all over the world with Jeffrey Epstein. He was all over his house. Remind you that there were cameras all over Jeffrey Epstein's houses. All of his houses and estates had cameras. Even in the bathrooms, there were cameras in the bathrooms on Epstein's estate. One of Epstein's victims, Joanna Schoberg, said that she never met Bill Clinton, but Jeffrey Epstein once remarked to her that Bill Clinton likes them young. Likes them young. Gross. That is gross. Good Lord. Ugh. And mind you, after the picture came out in 2020 of Bill Clinton being massaged by one of Epstein's victims, he went on to speak at the 2020 Democratic National Convention the next day, like nothing happened. And after Joe Biden won in 2020, Bill Clinton and Kamala Harris went on a tour to black colleges. Yeah, supposedly to speak to young girls. Think about this. They were at Howard University, Bill Clinton, Kamala Harris, after these pictures emerged, to speak to young women. It's a big swamp. As George Carlin said, it's a big club and you ain't in it. These people are all disgusting. Of course, Bill's wife is in there. Virginia Roberts Giuffre, who really is the MVP of all this, rest in peace to her. She allegedly committed suicide last year. That young woman, she was the young woman who blew the whistle on all this years ago. She claimed, her lawyers are claiming that Bill and Hillary's foundation may have bankrolled Epstein's girl Friday, Ghislaine Maxwell, who was his girlfriend and, you know, as well. And so that's where she, just look at the Clinton Foundation in Haiti, if you really want to see some scandalous stuff. Now, you have the current U.S. Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, who you see with Donald Trump all the time. Emails indicate that he and his family were in contact with Jeffrey Epstein and appeared to have planned to take a visit to Epstein Island after previously claiming to have cut ties. So Lutnick literally lied. Lutnick went on TV and said, oh, I didn't have anything to do with Jeffrey Epstein. I really didn't want anything to talk. Well, emails say that that's not the case. The files show now that Lutnick, who is currently our Secretary of Commerce today, arranged to visit Jeffrey Epstein's island in 2012. That was 3 years after he had been found to be a sex trafficker of underage girls. 3 years after. Last year, Lutnick said in an interview that he had been neighbors with Epstein in New York and that he had cut ties with Epstein around 2005. So he lied by at least 7 years. And he called him disgusting. A spokesperson for the Commerce Department told the Wall Street Journal that Lutnick had severely limited contacts with Epstein and had never been accused of doing wrong. But again, you're at least 3 years after the man had been charged and convicted of sex trafficking underage girls. You were emailing him to go to his island with your family? What? There's also Steve Tisch, who is the owner of the New York Giants. He was mentioned several hundred times in the files, and some emails exchanges from 2013, it appears that Epstein connected Tisch to several women. We hope that they were at least women and not girls. In a statement, Tisch said that he and Epstein had a brief association where they exchanged emails about adult women, and in addition, we discussed movies, philanthropy, and investment. He said, I did not take him up on any of his invitations, and I never went to his island. As we all know, he was a terrible person and somebody I deeply regret associating with. Sure, buddy. Sure, buddy. Now, this one really is really bizarre, okay, and grotesque. Trigger warnings, all the trigger warnings and all the not safe for work and not safe for life warnings with this one. George H.W. Bush, who I never liked. He was the head of the CIA, one of the people who helped fill our communities with crack in the 80s and expanded mass incarceration for black people. So I ain't got no love for Bush. But in an email chain dated August 28th, 2019, from the joint FBI, New York Police Department Child Exploitation and Human Trafficking Task Force, they relayed a tip about a purported Jeffrey Epstein victim. The claims in the forwarded summary are extremely graphic. So again, I'm just telling you, this is extremely graphic, including ritualistic acts on a yacht, the dismemberment of babies, the consumption of feces, and an allegation of rape by, of course, George H.W. Bush. Now, mind you, both of the George Bushes, W and George H.W., were members of the Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale that are allegedly to have taken place in all kinds of satanic rituals and all kinds of disgusting things. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. You have a lot of other political figures: John Kerry, Ted Kennedy, RFK Jr., who's our current Secretary of Human and Health Services. He flew on Epstein's plane a bunch of times. He knew Epstein. Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York, one of the richest men in the world. And of course, Alan Dershowitz, who defended OJ and, now has become one of Donald Trump's biggest defenders because, of course, Donald Trump is allegedly compromised by Israel. And so you're looking at somebody who, has questionable morality, and at least we have to question who he's actually working for. But according to an FBI confidential informant's testimony released in the files, Alan Dershowitz is a Mossad asset, which should not be a surprise to anybody. That should not surprise anybody. And Epstein worked with both the United States intelligence and allied foreign intelligence. According to the report, Epstein allegedly communicated with Mossad through Alan Dershowitz with phone calls forwarded by an alleged Mossad briefings and was reportedly trained under Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who we're going to talk about in a few minutes. The woman I told you, the young woman who, ended up allegedly committing suicide last year, Virginia Giuffre, originally named Virginia Roberts before she got married, she said that Alan Dershowitz sexually abused her, and he sent the dogs after her. He sent the dogs after her, and he made her recant. And she said she must have been mistaken. So Alan Dershowitz is a man with a lot of power and a lot of stroke and a lot of power, people, you know, in places that can get to you. This one surprised me because this is somebody I had a lot of respect for. I'm not going to lie to you. Noam Chomsky, who is one of the great academics, leftist academics in, you know, modern history, one of the most influential academics and linguists ever in left-wing politics. He was, you know, there's an email with him telling Epstein that he is fantasizing about going to his island. He was getting reimbursed for thousands in travel fees by Jeffrey Epstein. He actually advised Epstein on his public rehabilitation efforts, telling him the great work that you have been doing speaks for itself. And this was like a few years ago. This wasn't that long ago, about I think this was less than a decade ago, when this was happening. Definitely very disgusting. Larry Summers, who was an advisor to Bill Clinton, an advisor to Barack Obama, one of the people who inspired Bill Clinton to deregulate Wall Street and not regulate derivatives, and one of the people who advised Barack Obama not to go after Wall Street too hard, and shaped who, you know, Obama's cabinet, and was also, I believe, the dean at Harvard or something in that range. He was caught seeking romantic advice from Jeffrey Epstein and even honeymooned on Epstein Island. And in a message, Epstein, in a message to Larry Summers, he talked about the Ukrainian war, which once again shows you the amount of reach that Jeffrey Epstein had. Like, how exactly would you know, somebody like Jeffrey Epstein, who's not technically in the government, have this much power and stroke with people who've been in the government? But Epstein, in a message to Larry Summers, talks about the Ukrainian-Russian conflict and says, Zelensky is looking for help. Putin is dismissive, saying he's being run by the Israelis, which he was. Also, they're in there complaining that young people like Bernie Sanders, and opining that if we had ranked choice voting, Trump may not have won in 2016 because Bernie Sanders would have been free to run as a third party after losing the primary without the threat of spoiling the election. This isn't just contained here to America, to these United States either. Like, we're talking about, hold on, caller. We're talking about people in governments and in high positions around the world. In the United Kingdom, you have Prince Andrew. Multiple mentions and photos show him in context with Epstein, including an undated images where he's literally pictured hovering over a woman. Like, these pictures, I think, have been released to the public, and they've covered the woman's face, but she looks like a girl, like she could be a teenager. If it is a woman, it's a very frail and very sort of slight woman. Authorities have stripped him of his royal titles amid this controversy. In a September 2010 email exchange between Epstein and Prince Andrew, Epstein said that he was in London and requested private time with them. At this point, Prince Andrew replies, "We could have dinner at Buckingham Palace and lots of privacy." So this man was in Buckingham Palace. Because we know this because Epstein actually follows up in an email and says, "Delighted for you to come here to Buckingham Palace. Come with whoever and I'll be free from 1600-ish. I guess he means 1600 hours, which would be 4 o'clock. p.m., 4 p.m. Tony Blair, who was the former prime minister of England, had Epstein at Downing Street, at basically their version of the White House. Epstein was in the British version of the White House, Downing Street, in 2002. They had a half-hour meeting. And just once again to show you how incestuous all these relationships are, Tony Blair is reported to have blocked the exposure of a lot of the famous names in law, in business, and politics, including some of his own cabinet, during the police investigation into pedophile internet activity known as Operation OR, which came out of the FBI investigation in the United States called Operation Avalanche. So again, these people protect each other. Doesn't matter whether it's America, whether it's the UK, these people are protecting each other, and they are protecting pedophiles. Another guy named Peter Mandelson, who was the former British ambassador to the United States, who is credited with helping to create a modern version of the Labour Party that propelled Tony Blair to power in the 90s, is facing criminal investigation stemming from the U.S. Justice Department's latest release during these Epstein Files. He was actually accused of passing on market-sensitive information that was clear financial interest to Epstein in wake of the 2008 financial crisis. So these people were involved in every single facet of our world, in running every single facet of our world, our economies, and our political systems and wars and things like this, while at the same time they were trafficking young girls and, hooking each other up with young women. This is horrific. Mandelson was just a part of the UK's current Prime Minister's Keir Starmer's administration, but was fired after just 7 months. This is, wow. And of course, anytime you have a conspiracy, there is a Rothschild involved, because, Epstein himself says that he was representing the Rothschilds. He tells that to who? One of the world's richest men and the owner of the guy who runs Palantir, Peter Thiel, who we talk about on this show all the time as one of the people running the surveillance state. So Epstein was having a lot of contact with Peter Thiel, one of the men designing our current AI surveillance state, and telling him that he represents the Rothschild family at the behest of Ariane D. Rothschild. You can see in emails that they're planning on how to carve up Ukraine. He actually emails Ariane de Rothschild, the Ukraine upheaval should provide many opportunities. Many. The Baroness and CEO of the Edmund de Rothschild Group had a $25 million contract with Epstein. You can see extensive emails, basically saying how interconnected Epstein was with the Rothschild family. And also who worked for Ariane de Rothschild, Catherine Rumler. Now, Catherine Rumler was one of Barack Obama's White House counsels. She actually turned down the Attorney General spot to work for Ariane de Rothschild, but later worked for Goldman Sachs and had dozens of known meetings with Epstein, along with other people. We see thousands of email exchanges, but also joined the Rothschild Bank. So again, it doesn't matter. Democrat, Republican, Trump administration, Biden administration, Clinton administration, Bush administration, these people all have an incestuous relationships with each other. They're all joined together with the same corporate interests, with the same interest in, debauchery, apparently. Now, this one really freaked me out. Stephen Hawking. I know a lot of you guys got to know who Stephen Hawking is, the great scientist who was in a wheelchair, who was a quadriplegic. That's Stephen Hawking. An email Epstein sent to Ghislaine Maxwell revealed that he suggested that was suggesting that Virginia Giuffre, or Virginia Roberts, had seen Stephen Hawking taking place in an underage orgy. So we have pictures of Stephen Hawking at the island, hanging out with Epstein and these people. Stephen Hawking, the guy's in a wheelchair. What the hell, man? What the hell? I told you earlier, Ehud Barak, who was the former prime minister of Israel, he's in the files. Virginia Giuffre, formerly Roberts, actually talked about how Ehud Barak brutalized her, beat her, and raped her so bad that she thought she was going to die, and that Jeffrey Epstein forced her to go back with him. Now, mind you, this is who introduced Jeffrey Epstein, who trained Jeffrey Epstein. And he is documented to have had dozens of known visits to Epstein properties, disguising entries, so he knew he was doing something that he shouldn't have been doing, and used Epstein connections to build political and intel lists that he shared with Donald Trump's former advisor, Steve Bannon. Again, these people are all involved in it together. So, wow. This is just we just got to the political figures. In the next segment, I'm going to get into the business and entertainment figures. But before that, I'm going to get this caller. Hello, caller. What's up?
Well, hey there. What's happening tonight?
It's all good, brother. We breaking down the Epstein Files.
Hey, bro, you're going to have to go to the Panama Papers, because this stuff starts out in the 80s, and it's a direct lineup. If you take the memo that I've been trying to get you to talk about, it lines up. And the reality, Epstein was a math genius. Yep. And he taught these people how to use debt as a means of extracting more wealth.
Yes, usury.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, now. Thank you for your call, brother. Yes. But yeah, I think we covered the Pandora Papers when the scandal happened, like 10 years ago. I was on with Jonathan, I believe. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I covered the scandal with Jonathan about 10 years ago, the Pandora Papers. There were also the Panama Papers. Zelensky, who runs Ukraine, was in the I believe the Pandora Papers, where they talked about how his business interests, he was hiding money, stashing money overseas and things like that. Again, it's important to understand why they spend so much time pitting us against each other. And it really is because the people who run this world are sick, twisted individuals. When we get back, we're going to talk about the business and entertainment world people. I know a lot of you people want to hear about Michael Jackson and some of the other people in the Epstein Files. We're going to get into that. Please stay with us here on WLTH 1370 AM. That's 92.7 in the FM dial. The Region's Choice, the People's Voice. I'm Scott Cannon. This is Straight Out of the Cannon. We're going to get into some more Epstein Files drama when we get back. Please stay with us.